The call, Clayton Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'm very pleased to be standing here tonight after our scheduled meal breaks. Coming out to talk about the gambling amendment number 4. You're looking at me a little bit confused. The scheduled meal breaks, Mr McIndoe, that's what we do, but unfortunately this government's taken that away. I'm just letting the world know. Anyway, Mr Chair, I digress, and I really wanted to get back to the bill.
Good.
The Gambling Amendment Bill number 3, I think, is actually heading very much in the right direction, and I really would like to put it out there to the Minister to give me some feedback on his thoughts in relation to a supplementary order paper that we've got in for an amendment. And it's to do with clause number 6, section 30, amending the meaning of Class 4 gambling. And unlike the Labor Party, New Zealand First strongly believes that the current situation with actual, reasonable and necessary is a very clunky way to work out how site venue operators are going to be remunerated for the cost of having those machines in their venues. And there is a real cost associated with having licensed machines in the licensed premises. And it's very difficult to work out what you're actually entitled to actually receive as far as the payment goes. And I think the fairest and most equitable way of working that out is, despite what Labor says, is through a commission-based payment. And you only have to look at other parts of gambling throughout New Zealand that operate under a similar method when you look at the TAB, which of course does exactly the same thing. They work on a commission-based payment for their venue operators on the turnover of their site is a 1.5% commission. I believe it is 1.5% commission for their venue operators. And if you've obviously got a busier operation, you're going to get a higher return. But at 1.5% of your gross turnover, it's hardly a significant incentive to have a racing organisation, TAB for example, in your establishment. And what we're proposing here, New Zealand First puts forward on the table, is exactly that. That a fair, reasonable and actual cost to be calculated is very clunky, it's very antiquated, it's very difficult to actually determine what you're entitled to, with rents go up all the time, your wage costs alter. You are virtually going through uncertainty from month to month and quarterly to quarterly what you're actually going to receive as a payment to have your machines on your premises. What this will do, this amendment, is amend this Act and bringing in a 1.5% commission-based payment on licensed, on Class 4 venue operators' licences of the gross turnover. Now, we looked at different scenarios that may work in a commission-based system. We looked at 16% of the net turnover, but the fluctuations that you get from a net turnover as opposed to the gross is, of course, how often those machines pay out. You have some weeks where, of course, you have a negative banking situation where you've actually given out more money to your gamblers, your punters that are in your venue, than you actually took in kind. So you actually find yourself some weeks under a net turnover adjustment of actually getting a negative fee. On a gross turnover, you look at the overall turnover of the venue and you're putting a 1.5% loading on that. We think that that is a very fair, very reasonable and respectable amount. It's hardly going to justify venue operators going out there to promote gambling. And of course, there are laws that already prevent that from happening in your licensed premises that is very, very heavily monitored. You can't even display on your monitor to show you what your jackpots are to the outside world. When you enter a gaming room, you know that you're doing so for the purposes of having a punt on the gaming machines, and you don't know what that jackpot is until you enter that gaming machine. So you can hardly go out there handing out flyers or out with a megaphone promoting that your gambling room's going off like a bucket of pippies in the sun. Get in there and have a quick punt in my poker machine room because it's going to be fantastic. That's not how the system operates. And I think, to be honest, the Labor Party is creating ghosts where there aren't any, ghosts, goblins and ghouls in their brain, to come up with an idea that somehow that getting a commission-based payment for licensed venue operators is a bad thing. We do support that. We hope that it gets the support in the House. I clearly see it's not going to get the support of from the Labor Party. We certainly do hope, Mr Dunn, that we do get your support and the support of the National Party. Look, we would be a strong supporter if we could get that through of this piece of legislation. We do believe the amendments that have been, Mr Chair.
Clayton Mitchell.
We do believe that the amendments that have been put forward are heading in the right direction. When the first and the second reading were put through, we were a little bit concerned on some of those clauses, particularly around key operators. I do believe that that has been ironed out. We certainly had some issues in regards to what constitutes a conflict of interest, particularly in the light of New Zealand being so small that only 1 degree of separation is going to basically negate you from getting any sort of financial support if you're in a club organisation from those societies that are handing them out. And so I think you've tidied that up very nicely too, Mr Dunn, so thank you for that. What this very important piece of legislation does is 5 areas that we largely support, is creates further transparency, makes it a lot clearer about who's getting what and why. It identifies a much better way of who are going to be key people that are now going to be held responsible, and that's what this legislation is about too. It's about personal responsibility to make sure that you're operating within the confines of the law. And what it really is about, which I like the most, is about cutting through a little bit of the red tape. It's about cutting through the bureaucracy to ensure that we can actually get more money returned to those communities, which is what Class 4 operating licences and venues are there to achieve. Unlike the counterparts which we've got Sky City Casino, which operate under a completely different model to what we're operating under here. This is sensible, this is for the community, this is about returning as much as we can back to those communities. We would support this if we get the support with our supplementary order paper from New Zealand First, amending the 1.5% of gross turnover for those venue operators, and we hope that it does get through for the final reading. Thank you, Mr Chair.